One of Trump world's favorite hobby horses as of late is the idea that President Trump deserves the Nobel Peace Prize, or what his press secretary calls the Nobel Peace Prize. And you know, maybe they're onto something. Because according to President Trump, he solved 6 wars since he returned to office. Well, it was 6 on Monday, and then on Tuesday it was 7. And anyone who ends a war in 24 hours maybe does deserve a Nobel Peace Prize, or at least a ticket to the pearly gates of heaven.
You know, I've solved 7 wars. We ended 7 wars. I want to try and get to heaven if possible. I'm hearing I'm not doing well. I hear I'm really at the bottom of the totem pole.
But hold on. As of yesterday, it was, let me check my papers here, 10 wars.
I settled 7 wars, and actually, if you think about pre-wars, add 3 more, so it would be 10.
Okay, a lot of WTF moments here, because WTF is he talking about? And WTF is a pre-war. And please note that he was wearing a hat that says Trump was right about everything, which is altogether too many words for a cap. He also says he's, quote, averaging about a war a month, which is truly impressive. Bravo, Mr. President. I've always said that Donald Trump, he's got a knack for peacemaking and uniting the people. Earlier this month, the White House clarified which wars the so-called president of peace claims to have resolved. They are the conflicts between Armenia and Azerbaijan, the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda, India and Pakistan, Israel and Iran, Cambodia and Thailand, Egypt and Ethiopia, and Serbia and Kosovo. Now, Donald Trump has intervened in several global conflicts this year. In some cases, he's been credited with calming tensions temporarily. In other cases, his role in the peacekeeping is kind of murky, and some of the wars he says are over are far from over. Let's start with Armenia and Azerbaijan. In the simplest of terms, they've been fighting over territory and tensions, and things have really heated up in the last few years. The leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan visited the White House on August 8th. They signed an agreement which reopens transportation routes and creates a major transit corridor that will be renamed Trump Route for International Peace and Prosperity. The acronym, if you say it, is TRIP, which is a really bad word for a road. Both leaders nominated Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. But the border remains closed between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and there are upcoming negotiations between the two which could reignite the conflict. And the deal they signed is not a peace treaty. It's progress. But a war solved? Highly debatable. Spoiler alert for the rest of this list, by the way. It's about as close as we get to an actual solved war. Let's move to the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda. Rwandan forces were providing military support to the M23 rebel group fighting the Congolese military. In June, Trump hosted 2 top diplomats from both nations to sign a peace agreement following negotiations that were aided by the government of Qatar. But this conflict is still very much ongoing. This week, the rebels walked away from peace talks. In July alone, Human Rights Watch estimates that the rebel forces killed 140 civilians after the peace agreement was signed. How about India and Pakistan? In May, the long-standing rivals saw 4 days of fighting in the disputed Kashmir region. Trump announced that the two countries had agreed to a U.S.-mediated truce. Pakistan then nominated Donald Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize, because doesn't everybody? India isn't giving the credit to Trump. And turning now to the Middle East and Israel's conflict with Iran. In June, after 12 days of strikes between the countries and U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear sites, Donald Trump announced a ceasefire between Israel and Iran. Israel has paused its military campaign against Iran, but Iran's nuclear program remains an issue, mainly because Trump took the U.S. out of the 2015 nuclear deal. And talks between the U.S. and Iran over its nuclear program are stalled. This may be less war solved and more war put on pause. Let's go to Cambodia and Thailand. In July, dozens were killed and more than 300,000 were displaced when intense fighting broke out over a border dispute. At the time, Trump was discussing trade deals with dozens of countries, and he essentially threatened to stop trade talks with Cambodia and Thailand if they didn't stop fighting. It worked, I guess. Fighting has stopped between the two, but the underlying issues of the conflict have not been addressed at all. So perhaps another war on pause. From here, we get into conflicts that aren't wars by any definition, like the conflict between Egypt and Ethiopia. They're not engaged in an armed conflict. They're at diplomatic odds over Ethiopia's construction of a dam, which Egypt fears is going to affect the water that goes into the Nile River. Trump has said the U.S. will facilitate relations between the two countries to resolve the dispute. No war. But he also, for some reason, claimed that the U.S. paid for the Ethiopian dam. which Ethiopian officials have denied. So not really sure what's going on with that one. And finally, Serbia and Kosovo. Again, not an actual war. Serbia, of course, does not recognize Kosovo, instead claiming that it's part of Serbia. The two nations normalized economic relations in 2020 during the first Trump administration. Trump says his diplomatic efforts in 2020 have prevented an outbreak of violence. So maybe that's the pre-war that he's talking about. So yeah, 6 to 10 wars solved by one man in 7 months. Seems unlikely, but hey, we're dealing with Donald Trump here, so I've got no reason not to believe him. Joining me now is Anna Marie Cox, political columnist for the New Republic and host of Space the Nation podcast. Anna Marie, great to see you. You know, the worry here is not that it's ludicrous, and his claims are ludicrous, and his press secretary says them. It's that world leaders are figuring this out, right? They're figuring out the way you get anything done with Trump is he sort of talks to you for 8 minutes about something, and then you nominate him for the Nobel Peace Prize, and you legitimize this nonsense.
That's exactly right. And I think we also need to emphasize here something you brought up, which is that none of this is about peace, right?
Right.
This is about either deal making or just
Yep.
hitting pause long enough to get a photo op to put in a gold frame to put in his ugly office. You know, he is not thinking about building relationships. He's not thinking about the world order. He's not thinking about growing the global village. He is thinking about his own interests, and he's jumping into conflicts he doesn't understand. And the confidence with which he does this is flabbergasting, I think. You've reviewed some of these things. Do you think he could name these countries on a map? Do you think if we pointed them out, he would pass that quiz? I mean, to be sure, like a lot of Americans wouldn't, but a lot of Americans aren't saying they deserve the Nobel Peace Prize.
Right, that's the distinction,
This
right?
isn't
You can come in and say,
it's
I'm a
not
president
diplomacy.
who's focused on domestic issues, and this isn't really my thing or whatever, but he's actually claiming it's his thing. In fact, a few weeks ago when he was with the head of the EU and a reporter asked him about this, you could see he was doing what he calls his weave, right? They asked him about Cambodia and Thailand. He didn't really have an answer. Then he talked about India and Pakistan. Then he talked about Congo and Rwanda. Then he talked about 7 million people being killed in Rwanda by machetes, which was 2 million, and it was the Rwanda genocide that ended in 1994 that had nothing to do with anything to do with Congo and Rwanda today that he's dealt with. So he doesn't know. That's the thing. There's no intimate relation. He couldn't name one leader who he had met with. Cambodia and Thailand, he talked about the two guys with whom we trade. I mean, it would be a joke if it weren't actually about lives and wars.
It is a joke. I mean, the line that I came up with that I was afraid to use almost is that he's auditioning for a Nobel Peace Prize, but it's more like the Gong Show, except it has terrible, terrible consequences and stakes, right? I mean, these are thousands, tens of thousands, millions of lives on the line in some cases, and whole regimes that don't deserve to be legitimized as well. I mean, the other through line through all of this is that he doesn't see these things in terms of negotiations with a compromise, but deals with a winner and a loser. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And the strong deserve to win, and the weak just need to realize they're losing. That is how he views life. That is how he views domestic issues as well as those abroad. That's actually a really interesting through line to me, which may not be obvious to everyone, which is because at home he's all bellicose and saber rattling, and abroad he seems like he says he's trying to negotiate peace. But it is all around the strong deserve to win, the weak just need to stop fighting. He's not
Ukraine
ever really
is a great example,
peace.
right?
He's negotiating surrender.
Ukraine is a perfect example. He keeps saying, the last time that Zelensky was at the White House, he said, you don't have the cards. And then this last time after he met with Putin, he said to Ukraine, well, they're the bigger, more powerful country, so you're going to have to make a deal. But again, it's the word deal. It's the concept of I am a deal maker, not I understand the underlying issues here, and they're complicated, right? He kept on saying he was going to solve the Ukraine war on day one, and then it was many months in when he said, you know, this is kind of complicated.
Well, so he's marketed himself as a negotiator, right, because of his real estate background. What I find ironic there is that, I don't know, I've had real estate deals in my life. It is totally possible to walk away from a real estate deal and feel like but everyone to feel like they got what they wanted, right? Like a win-win is completely possible.
Yes.
Trump does not believe in win-wins. For him, winning means someone has to lose, right? if someone thinks it's a win-win, that means it's a lose-lose. Like, so for him, there's only win-lose or lose-lose. Does that make any sense? Like, someone has to be weak in every negotiation. If someone doesn't walk away feeling like they didn't get what they want, then it's not a win for him. So he's a terrible negotiator. I mean, all he's doing in these imagined diplomatic efforts, even, right? Like, it's not even he's actually doing it, is picking the loser, not even picking the winner. Like, he's trying to make the loser realize they've lost.
Yeah, it's a whole different kind of negotiation than we're used to. Kind of amazing that we even have to have the conversation, but he says it enough that I just wanted to let people know about these 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 wars, the 3 pre-wars.
Can I jump in one thing here?
Yeah.
Which is that I think this is important for Americans to pay attention to, because there are some important reminders and lessons that we'll see when these deals inevitably fall apart, which is authoritarianism is fragile, right? Oligarchy is fragile. History shows us this, that resistance is more resilient than tyranny. I don't know, you've seen my wallpaper. I love Star Wars, my favorite show, Andor. Tyranny requires constant effort. It breaks, it leaks. Authority is brittle. Oppression is the mask of fear. Trump has built his regime on that authoritarianism and that fear, and it is brittle. And I believe it will break. They always do.
We begin this hour with the clear message Donald Trump made during his campaign, which has continued through these last 7 months.
In 2016, I declared, I am your voice. Today, I add, I am your warrior. I am your justice. And for those who have been wronged and betrayed, I am your retribution. I am your retribution.
And the first time I had it, but you guys were after me. I said I had to focus. I was the hunted, and now I'm the hunter. It's a big difference.
Perhaps the biggest difference is that this time he comes equipped with a Justice Department that appears willing to answer his calls, whether directly or indirectly, and has been quite busy going after those who Trump would claim are his perceived enemies. The latest example being his former national security advisor, John Bolton, who had his Maryland home and Washington, D.C. office searched by FBI agents yesterday, reportedly as part of a, quote, national security investigation in search of classified records, according to what a source familiar with the matter told NBC News. Perhaps it's just a coincidence that Bolton has been a vocal Trump critic ever since leaving Trump's White House back in 2019. And Bolton is not alone. There is an ever-growing list of perceived enemies who have been targeted by Trump's Department of Justice, and it's safe to say he is likely not the last. One of those perceived enemies, Miles Taylor, joined us earlier this morning on The Weekend and spoke about his concern that his home could be next on the FBI's list.
We expect it. I mean, really, we expect it. And that's what is so surreal about this is we can all here as we're talking about this be so certain of the president's revenge campaign to know potentially who that next target might be or one of those next targets. I mean, when my wife and I woke up and saw the news, she basically said to me, it's coming.
Joining us now, MSNBC national security and intelligence analyst Christopher O'Leary. He is a former special agent and senior counterterrorism executive for the FBI. Michael Feinberg, former assistant special agent in charge with the FBI. And Susan Glasser, staff writer at The New Yorker and author of the weekly column Letter from Trump's Washington. All, thank you very much for coming to The Weekend. Christopher, let me start with you. One of the things, I don't believe I read in the intro, but one of the things the president said in talking about all of these things is that he called himself the nation's chief law enforcement officer. That's the attorney general. What do you make of the president giving himself that mantle?
Well, so you're right. Traditionally, it's the attorney general. I guess the president can designate himself to be whatever he wants at this point. But I think it's messaging to his base that he is going to do what he's doing in Washington, D.C., what he did in L.A., creating a perceived national emergency and justifying the deployment of federal troops and in L.A., National Guard and U.S. Marines, and here in Washington, D.C., where as I drove in this morning, I did not see burning tires or, it wasn't gangs of New York or anything like that. So, I mean, it's this false narrative that's been going on for a decade now as he consolidates power and starts using the tools of national security now with the FBI to go against his political enemies.
I said it before and I say it again, I love me a Susan Glasser article. So, Susan, you wrote a new one, The Retribution Phase of Trump's Presidency Has Begun. I'm going to read you to you. We don't know yet where this will all end up. It's far from certain that these investigations will lead to prosecutions, let alone a prison wing full of Trumpian enemies of the people. But we can already say for sure that he wasn't just bluffing with his campaign season threats. How is it possible that so many years into this Trump era, there is not a more precise vocabulary for describing how it is that we are constantly being surprised when Trump and his advisors do exactly what we have expected them to do? He has said for a very long time that he was going to go after his perceived enemies. Kash Patel has an enemies list in the book. The administration says they don't have one in the administration, but it's all out there. And I'm curious, especially when you look at John Bolton, for example, and them going into his homes, can you separate everything they have said about retribution and going after their perceived enemies from the action that they took?
Yeah, I think, thank you, by the way, love being here with you on Saturday mornings. And, you can read my column every week. That's great. The problem is there's too much material for it. And I think that is the collective problem that we're dealing with right now, right? What is the language to tell people, that thing we've been warning you about is happening, and yet is still shocking, surprising, and upsetting when it actually happens. There must be some long German word for that, but I haven't found it yet. And I feel like, and yet it's very important, I believe, to be able to maintain a sense that this is, shattering norms, rules, expectations, and possibly laws as well. And so how do we maintain that balance? We're only, barely 6 months or so into this. Imagine where we're going to be in a few years, because I think that point is very important that was already mentioned, which is, he didn't get all this power. He didn't go to all this effort to consolidate this power in himself, in the Justice Department and the FBI, in order not to then use it. So this was always, I think, an inevitable next phase. But it's also very much connected with, even if he doesn't prosecute these people, even if they don't end up in jail, the chilling effect of it, I think, is very real. I have already experienced, as I'm sure you have, sources who were willing to speak out previously about Donald Trump, who worked for him, who are afraid to do so now. The chilling effect in Washington is one of the main consequences of actions like this, and it's much broader than what happens to John Bolton. It sends a message, I think, to a lot of other people who are very powerful witnesses, in effect, against Trump. And, let's be real. It's Saturday morning. It's like Richard Nixon's fever dream, this administration, doing all the things that previous presidents might have dreamed of doing, but do because they felt constraints, either institutional or political or personal. And those are constraints that Trump does not feel.
Yeah, or moral, a sense of shame. Michael, speaking of shattering norms, as John Bolton's home and office were being raided by the FBI, Kash Patel, the FBI director, Pam Bondi, the Attorney General of the United States, and Dan Bongino, who I guess is now back at work at the FBI, all tweeted things. No one is above the law. FBI agents on mission. America's safety isn't negotiable. Justice will be pursued always. Public corruption will not be tolerated. Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, but these are the kinds of officials, one, who never comment about any kind of investigation or action undertaken by their agencies, but also, I mean, in a normal world, they shouldn't be talking about these things for fear of tainting whatever investigation is happening.
Well, it's not just a question of an intangible fear. It's a question of official Department of Justice policy. Right. As a general matter, as outlined in the Justice Manual promulgated by DOJ, the organization and its subsidiary organizations like the FBI are not supposed to comment on ongoing investigations until there is a formal charging document. What we are seeing is a real-time creation of a crisis of legitimacy for the FBI, created entirely by Kash Patel's need to put himself in front of everything, that is going to take decades to ameliorate once this era passes.
You know, Christopher, I want to play some sound from Trump claiming to know nothing about the FBI raid on Bolton's home really quickly.
No, I don't know about it. I saw it on television this morning. I'm not a fan of John Bolton. He's a real sort of a lowlife. He's not a smart guy, but he could be a very unpatriotic guy. I mean, we're going to find out. I know nothing about it.
Do you expect the DOJ to brief you on this?
Yeah, they'll brief me probably today sometime.
And the foreign minister.
I tell Pam and I tell the group, I don't want to know, but just you have to do what you have to do. I don't want to know about it. It's not necessary. I could know about it. I could be the one starting it. I'm actually the chief law enforcement officer.
For someone who claims to know nothing about it, he had sure a lot to say there. He said that the DOJ would be briefing him probably sometime today, but I tell them not to. And then, you know, there's all this stuff of where the smoke and mirrors for people who are watching to say, no, I could be involved, but I'm not. But we all are watching and talking to sources that are within this DOJ and folks like you who have been a part of the law enforcement apparatus of this country for a very long time. That's not the case. He is very involved. And even if he's not giving direct, telling folks exactly what to do, the wink and nods are there. He's made very clear what he wants.
Yes, and for somebody who's interviewed and interrogated countless people over the years, that's not screaming of an honest answer to me. Right. So just throw that out.
Yeah.
If the FBI was arresting somebody in Queens, New York, on a document fraud case, the president probably wouldn't know about it. If they're arresting his former national security advisor, I guarantee you he knows about it and had a hand in it, especially if the information seems to be coming from the CIA director. And everybody throughout DOJ and obviously this administration are political appointees and fierce loyalists to the president. He is in the know, likely, on most of this stuff. So that's problematic. Back to what you were, the tweets. Kash Patel LARPing yesterday, which is what he's been doing since the beginning, patently unqualified for the job, likens himself to a wizard protecting the president, the king. I mean, that's exactly what we saw play out yesterday. Now, is Ambassador Bolton, does he have information or documents? Well, that remains to be seen. But the political influence on all of this is what should be concerning, because the FBI has incredible capabilities and power that should not be turned against political enemies.
Susan, the FBI Director Kash Patel was on Fox Business yesterday, and just listen, on Wednesday, listen to what he had to say about the FBI's search of Mar-a-Lago in August of 2022, 3 years ago.
The answer has been definitive. There was no crime. There was no predicate to go and invade Donald Trump's home. We have answered that definitively. And so when they do raids like Mar-a-Lago, now the American public knows it was made up. It was completely false. It was completely unconstitutional pursuant to our judicial courts.
And so, Susan, he says there was no predicate to go and he says, invade Donald Trump's home. In the 7 o'clock hour, we put up a calendar. There it is. It started in May of 2021 with the archives asking Trump to return the missing presidential records. And you can see 6 more events of them trying to get the documents back. And then in August of 2022, 3 years ago this month, the FBI got a warrant to search Mar-a-Lago. So what's Kash Patel doing here by saying there's no predicate to go and search Donald Trump's home when there it is, right there in black and white, but also we watched it in real time.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's another shocking breach. You want to talk about norms and protocols, right. But this is the director of the FBI selling out his own agency. Remember also that he is calling into question the actions, the lawful actions of many, many hundreds of people who work for him now as the director of the ostensibly, but no longer nonpartisan FBI. So, you know, I think it's important to note that he's telling the FBI workforce, I will choose the lie over the truth when it comes to Donald Trump, and also when it comes to your own actions. The fact that it was set up right before this raid makes it all the more resonant a comment, because let's remember they found actual classified documents, large numbers of them, in Donald Trump's residence at Mar-a-Lago. And so, again, it's the inversion of truth. It's the opposite of truth that you're hearing from the director of the FBI. And it's that undermining of the credibility of the entire agency that works for him that really strikes me there. And then just one other point, which is John Bolton. We don't know yet if there is any basis for this case or not. We do know that in Trump's first term, his Justice Department sought unsuccessfully to question the publication of Bolton's memoir in the room where it happened on the basis of saying that he was improperly disclosing information. They did not succeed in stopping the publication of that book. There was an investigation that was launched by Trump's Justice Department in the first term. That investigation was ended after Trump was defeated and left office and during the Biden administration. So are they resurrecting an investigation that was already disbanded? Is it a new investigation? We don't know that. We also don't know why they couldn't have handled this the way that they normally handle things, which is to negotiate with Bolton and his lawyer rather than staging what appeared to be a very public show just a few days after Donald Trump tweeted in outrage because John Bolton was publicly commenting and pointing out that his efforts to mediate the Russian war in Ukraine were so far coming up empty and were failing. And, you know, remember, this is the same week. It's only been 1 week in which Donald Trump have made a great deal and to have brokered a meeting between Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky, which hasn't happened. And that's what John Bolton has been on television talking about all week long, is the fact that Donald Trump is once again lying to people, puffing up and misrepresenting his efforts on the world stage, which look quite embarrassing to the United States.
Just a week. That's crazy. Christopher O'Leary, Michael Feinberg, and Susan Glasser, thank you.
On the campaign trail, President Trump said he'd take revenge against his perceived enemies if he won the election. His supporters, he emphasized, could count on him to be their retribution. Yesterday's court-authorized search of one of his most vocal critics suggests promises made, promises kept as the retribution presidency takes shape. This time, it's former Trump National Security Advisor John Bolton under investigation after FBI agents searched his home and office as part of a probe into the handling of classified information. And while Trump claims ignorance over the search, Vice President J.D. Vance detailed the administration's plans.
We're in the very early stages of an ongoing investigation into John Bolton. I will say we're going to let that investigation proceed. What I can tell you is that unlike the Biden DOJ and the Biden FBI, our law enforcement agencies are going to be driven by law and not by politics. And so if we think that Ambassador Bolton has committed a crime, of course, eventually prosecutions will come.
Joining us now is George Conway, conservative lawyer and president of the Society of the Rule of Law. He's also the co-host of the George Conway Explains It All podcast. George was also in the neighborhood as the events unfolded. So, George, did you get a tip about this? How did you know that it was happening is my first question. And then my second question is, what did you see in terms of the volume of what was being, taken out of John Bolton's home?
By the time I found out about it basically because Kash Patel had been talking about it and people were talking about it on social media. I live 10 minutes away. So I was there by 8 o'clock. But by the time I got to John Bolton's house, there was already a crowd of media and neighbors and onlookers there. So I just found out about it like everyone else. It's just that I know where he lives because I live around here, and I've driven my daughters to and from their friend's house by driving by his house.
And let's show some footage of when the boxes were taken from Mar-a-Lago, and then what we just were showing you some footage of John Bolton's house. Is there any correlation between the volume of what's being taken versus what's actually there?
Yeah, we have no idea whether there's anything in there that is ultimately could provide evidence against John Bolton. I mean, I'm sure they're pulling out anything that would be related to his work at the White House, and then they're going to have to review it to see whether there's anything in there that would constitute evidence of a crime. So I don't think that there's going to be, I don't think that the volume of material taken out of the house is necessarily probative of anything, because they don't have time to read everything at the house. They're just collecting things that fit possibly the general description, and as what happened at Mar-a-Lago, and then they have to focus in on what materials could possibly be relevant. I doubt that John Bolton, being the careful lawyer that he is and the fastidious person that he is, had anything like what Donald Trump had in his basement, and then what Donald Trump had, he then lied about, refused to give back to the government, then tried to destroy security camera footage about when he had people move the documents to hide from the FBI. I don't think we're going to have any evidence anywhere near like that.
George, can I ask you what your thoughts were on hearing Vice President Vance in that interview there use words like "we're conducting" and "our" in reference to an investigation? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought the Oval Office, the president and vice president, were at least supposed to pretend like they weren't directly interfering in law enforcement operations in the United States.
That book has been thrown out. We're operating under a new set of rules here, where we have political prosecutions that are directed, to please the president of the United States, where the incoming FBI, the new FBI director, who has zero serious experience in law enforcement and none at the FBI, put out coloring books that praised the Donald Trump when he was, under indictment, and then had enemies lists. He has enemies lists that John Bolton is on. So this is a totally new environment that we have, and totally new rules here. There's no serious pretense here that they're abiding by the rule of law, contrary to what Mr. Vance is saying. This is all about showmanship and retribution. And this is just an abuse of power, like so much else we've been seeing from the Trump administration.
Yeah, to your point, George, I actually want to play for you and our viewers this soundbite of President Trump back in 2020, and some comments he made about John Bolton, really expressing his feelings there when he released his book. Take a listen to this.
In terms of Bolton, he broke the law.
It's really treasonous, what he did. He took classified information and he published it. I believe that he's a criminal.
Have you been briefed on the FBI raid of John Bolton's home?
No, I don't know about it. I saw it on television this morning. I'm not a fan of John Bolton.
So, there may be people out in this country who want to think that the FBI and the Department of Justice are apolitical, even in this current climate. I know that's obviously ludicrous, but for people who are out there who may not remember that soundbite of Donald Trump, explain to them why a soundbite like that, a comment like that from the president nearly 5 years ago, setting his sights directly on John Bolton, calling him treasonous, referring to him as criminal, would be a factor in the way that the FBI is behaving today.
Well, look, it shows the motivation. And if he actually, the president of the United States isn't supposed to be making comments like that about a possible criminal investigation without any basis for it. But the fact that he said that several years ago, the fact that the Justice Department at that point did not conduct a criminal investigation, at a time when the Justice Department, led by even a partisan such as Bill Barr, told him no on occasion. That tells you that there was no there. And in fact, as I recall, there was some civil litigation about the pre-publication process for John Bolton's book. And the head of the civil division, the guy who took the job that I was going to be nominated for until I decided I had wanted to have nothing to do with the Trump administration, he resigned because he was being asked to do things that were really just unjustified in light of John Bolton's cooperation with the pre-publication process. The truth of the matter is, what Donald Trump was upset about was not that there was classified information in there, but the fact that John Bolton, in great detail, portrayed Donald Trump as a chump and a fool and basically a know-nothing about foreign policy and completely unsuited for the office of President of the United States. And John Bolton has stuck to that. I mean, he learned a lot about Donald Trump in his time at the White House, and none of it was good.
All right, George Conway, greatly appreciate you joining us tonight and your thoughts on all of this.
This week, a Connecticut lawmaker found himself in the middle of an online firestorm for trying to protect his constituents. Authorities are investigating a flood of death threats and harassing messages aimed at State Representative Corey Paris after a post he made on social media advising the local community to stay vigilant during ICE raids in the area. The post was amplified by the popular online account Libs of TikTok, which called on the Justice Department to charge him criminally. And that message was later reposted by ICE with the Justice Department tagged. Joining me now is Connecticut State Representative Corey Paris, a Democrat. Representative Paris, this is the first time you're telling your story on TV. Tell me about your experience. What prompted you to post the message, and how did you discover it had gone viral?
Well, Reverend, thank you for having me first and foremost. And you're right, it is the first time that I'm sharing this story. What prompted me to post the message was just out of a moral mission. I was elected to do a job. I was elected to protect my constituents. And as I've done and many of my colleagues have done, we've just simply tried to amplify the message of sharing with folks to be safe in the areas that we live in, especially in times right now. I didn't realize that it had gone viral until I started getting tagged on things on X. And it was a little weird to me, but then I think things had kind of gotten out of control by the time it had actually reached ICE, reposting it and telling the Department of Justice to basically call for my arrest, which then has now led to many folks calling for my death, and also calls that have been made to me threatening my family as well. And so for me,
You said that one said you should be lynched?
Lynched, executed. Many people who have called, one caller in particular said he knew where my family lived, he knew where I lived, was coming for us. And again, it's all very weird to us that this has just come out of nowhere, but certainly we feel under attack by the federal government, who has not doubled down.
Have you heard from anyone in the Trump administration about this?
Anyone in the Trump administration, if that includes DHS and DOJ, they've both given statements to publications simply saying that I was wrong and I put their agents at risk, and I never did anything of the sort.
What about local law enforcement? Is there any concern about your safety? Are you given any protection?
Well, I certainly don't want to comment on my safety right now with local law enforcement. All law enforcement across our state has been helpful, and I think that this is a reminder for many people, other elected officials and just regular citizens, that you could be targeted by this government at any point in time. What's more important is that you have to be vigilant and remain safe while under attack.
Now, were you familiar with the account Libs of TikTok before this? What have you learned about how information spreads online through right-wing accounts?
Yeah, I was not familiar with Libs of TikTok before this, and I will tell you that what's really important is that for about 72 hours, all of this information had been spread across Christian media, conservative media, Trump, pro-Trump MAGA media. And so for 3 days, no one had reported the story, but many of the conservatives and many of the followers of Libs of TikTok had been writing articles for conservative outlets saying that I had doxed folks. And that's just not true. So many people have now amplified the story 10 times more than what we would have expected. And it's been reviewed or shared or liked more than 2 million times.
Now, many of your fellow Democratic lawmakers have rallied around you. What has been the response to the support you've received?
Well, it's been overwhelming. And again, I think many people are worried about our safety and our well-being. But, you know, for me and my family, we are certainly shaken, but we're not moved. We know that there was a moral obligation to do this because the way that I was raised, Rev, is that this country was founded and built by 3 classes of people: the enslaved person, the refugee, and the immigrant. That's in our DNA as a country. And when we start to forget that, we start to move away from the democracy that we all have upheld an oath to defend. And so some of my Republican colleagues have reached out. There are other Republican colleagues who have said that, you know, other atrocious things. All I can do is continue to do the work for those who have elected me to office.
Now, this incident sends a clear sign that this administration and their supporters don't want people to understand their rights when confronted by law enforcement.
Right.
Why do you think that is, and what can we as normal, everyday citizens do to counter this?
Well, Rev, I wish I could certainly be in the mindset of any member of the administration to understand why they're doing what they're doing. But there's one thing that guarantees due process in this country, and that's the Constitution of the United States. And so if we're defending the Constitution, it includes and guarantees due process around liberty and property and freedom for any person, not citizen, for any person. So I think it's important for us to know our rights and to be able to fight back given the very documents that have upheld our institutions and our government for so long.
What's next for you, Corey? Do you think you'll be able to continue to do your job?
I'm going to have to find a way to do my job no matter what, Rev, because that's the kind of person that I am. I cannot shriek in the face of many of these bullies, many of the intimidation. That's what they want for so many of us to do. They want us to shriek away and be intimidated and be silenced. And I certainly cannot do that because, once again, where there is no dissent in this country, there is no democracy. And so because we have dissent in this country and we've had it for so long, and you know this by way of your career, it is important for us to keep our democracy strong when we have that notion.
Well, we are praying for you and all concerned. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Rev.
Connecticut State Representative Corey Paris.